Okay, so our issue from last time, let's go ahead and open up our, so we were trying to, that was unloading the scene, so when we hit Nora controller, when we said load scene additive here, it worked. Let's go ahead and comment this guy out. That's from my testing yesterday. And then unload scene here for get key down space. Now, what's actually interesting here, though, is let's run this. So now, just look at the code one more time. As Nora is running around, if steps left is 0, we're going to go ahead and load the fight scene, and we're loading this additive. And what this ultimately does is it adds it to the current scene. So now your current scene is all the game objects it used to have in it, along with all the new game objects from the new scene. Fine. Okay, so now we have all these things, and we saw that last time. We just didn't know what to do with it. So if we go ahead and run that, we'll see it here. All right, so here's Nora walking around. All right, so now we are in our new scene, but notice here we have our fight scene. So in our fight scene, we have our Nora, we have all these things, and let me try something here. Can I? Yeah, I can definitely turn off the game map. So there's Nora. So we see that she's there, right? So a couple of things. So really what we've done here is we've, here's the new scene where we don't have a map or anything, but we have Nora and a camera there. One thing we could do here is, and this is what Muath had pointed out, there's Nora. It's like Find Waldo. Is Waldo, right? What's his name? Yeah, so you see the little top of her hat there, the top corner. So if we come in, we turn off this game map, we can see this stuff. But we do still have now 2 cameras in our scene. We have the camera here. So notice down here it's giving us some warnings. You know, there are 2 audio listeners in the scene. There, blah, blah, blah. This is a bunch of stuff. Now, the fact that we have 2 cameras might actually be okay in this particular case, in our particular situation, because we're always keeping the camera in the center of the scene, which is the same as what our second scene is. So one thing we could do, and this will actually be an interesting thing to try, I'm going to go ahead and remove, let's stop this. I'm going to go into my second scene here. This isn't going to be a solution, but just an interesting thing to look at. So I'll take the main camera out of this scene. So we have no way of displaying this scene right now. In fact, actually, maybe the better way of doing it would be we can work on the scene. Oh, is there a way to? Yeah. And then once we're ready to actually run it, you go in here and just turn the camera off. And you might want to do that programmatically so it just happens before the thing. That way, when we load it, there's only 1 camera in existence. So let's go back to our main scene now. We'll save this guy. We'll run that. Well, it seems like it should have happened by now. Definitely should have happened by now. So it looks like what we were seeing is that second camera. Okay, because Nora's already there. So that's, so when the second scene loaded, the most local camera became the active camera. All right, so that's okay. So then we would programmatically, with that in mind, we would programmatically hide the other camera. So we can decide to do that. We can just make this play where anytime if we have a whole bunch of stuff in our scene that we want to hide, we can probably throw it all in a giant game object. Let me actually do that back here. I'm just going to create an empty game object, and we'll call this scene stuff. and inside there, I'm going to throw my game map, and I'm going to throw Nora. So all my stuff is inside that game object. Okay. I'll go ahead and save that. Now we're going to go load that second scene. Okay, well, so we see the scene's been loaded here. And then when that scene's been loaded, I'm going to take scene stuff, and I'm going to hide that. And that will hide everything that's in there. Now when we hit spacebar and we come back, it's interesting. Why did it unhide? It's still there right now. We do have the Nora fight on key code space. Just make sure we're getting in there. It seemed like clearly we were. We unloaded the scene asynchronously fight, but I don't think we saw it leave the scene here. All right, so we're moving around. Loading the new scene, there's fight. So fight's in there now. We can then programmatically hide scene stuff, do our fight stuff. So now we're in this scene, effectively. All right, now it says no cameras rendering. That's when we want to then go and re-show this. That might be our fix. That might let us pull it off without a singleton. So let's programmatically do that now then. So we'll go into Nora controller, and we're going to give ourselves a public variable. Call this public game object, maybe scene container, something like that. And just so we don't forget, let's go hook that up. So that script is on Nora. And here's our scene container. And I'm going to drag scene stuff in there, which houses everything that's in our scene. And then down here, before we load our next scene, so when we have steps left as 0, we'll go ahead and we're going to say this dot scene container dot game object dot enabled. Isn't there a... Here's my dot game object. We need to programmatically remove that from the, or hide that from the scene.
Try using set active.
Oh, set active. Good call. To false. All right, so we'll set that guy active to nothing. Let's just make sure it goes away now, programmatically. Which should just leave us one camera in the scene, so that same warning should also go away. Okay, so now we're here. No warning down here. When I hit the space bar, then we want it to come back. So now we're going to need to, we're still going to need to use the singleton because the situation right now is we need that first scene to know that it's supposed to show itself again. So let's see, how do we... Is there a way to do it without the singleton? At some point, we're going to have to show a singleton anyway, so let's just do the singleton. Because when we hide this guy, we need to have some way of notifying the previous scene that we currently have that game object hidden. We need to have some way of telling that guy to turn back on. All right. Now, a couple ways we can do this. There's, just a quick thought. There's a bad way that will work, and then there's probably the better way that will also work. Just to talk about these out loud, what we can do is in here, if we had some sort of global variable, we're going to create a singleton here in a minute. But if we had some sort of global variable, maybe called like should show scene or something like that, should show game object, maybe an update, or if you want to be a little bit more efficient, we can say in fixed update, we constantly ping that and say, should I show the scene? Should I show the scene? Should I show the scene? So we would maybe say, if I should show the scene and I'm currently not showing the scene, then show the scene. Make sense? But we would be asking that question 60 times per second. We probably would not notice. Okay, so let's actually write it that way first. Both ways are going to use a singleton. So initially, we're going to need a singleton. So I'm going to go into my scripts, and I'm going to create a new C# script. But we're going to basically gut this script. So I'm going to create a C# script, and I'm going to call this core, because that's what I name all my singletons for. I'm not even sure where that came from. That's just what I name my singletons. Okay. I think a lot of people name their singletons singleton. That just seems very boring to me. I have no idea why I originally named it core. I don't know, it's like the core. Yeah, they name them core. So we'll click on this guy. It's open in here. Now, the very first thing we want to do is we don't want this singleton to act like normal game objects. We don't want update to get called every 2 seconds and that kind of stuff. Now, in C#, this is how the inheritance model works. In Java, instead of this colon here, it would say extends. Same thing, okay? So for those of you who are in 250, we haven't actually written an inheritance model yet, but we've talked about it several times where we said that all objects come from object, the global class object. So anything would be an object. And I think we've shown in there that everything, any class we create, like we created a superstring or something, would extend object. Like that's like an invisible thing that would be there. Well, we want this guy in here. So the equivalent of this in C# would be, I think object in C# is a lowercase o, yeah. That's the equivalent in C#. And notice it's not screaming because, I mean, it's unnecessary. So what I just wrote here is saying that this new class core is a child of the object class, which it would be anyway. So what I have written right there is identical, to that. So that's what we want core to be in this case. We want core to just be a plain Jane C# class. We don't want it to be part of that mono behavior thing, because that mono behavior thing says that this script, when he gets loaded into the scene, has his update method called constantly. And that's not what we want. So now I'll go ahead and I'm going to dump our start and our update. And we're going to fill this guy up with, well, right now we're just going to put one thing in here. We want a variable that's going to be accessible to us globally and that we can share between scenes. So we haven't actually mentioned it in this class, so let's just do that real quick. Get it into our slides. Okay. This has actually been the biggest headache, I think, of switching to Android, is I'm so used to using numbers and pages. I don't care about the application. It's just those are the apps I've typically used. So I have iCloud. there isn't an Android application for it. Now, if I'm on a PC and I have to go into a web page for it, that's okay. That's not the end of the world. But you can't go to the web page version on an Android phone. Not that it would work all that great anyways. And there aren't apps. Is it like, in principle, like it seems like it would help Apple's people. I mean, there's going to be people using Android anyways, right? It seems like it would be good for Apple to not make people move away from their iCloud setup. Because they want people on iCloud. So why not release Pages and Keynote and those for Android as native apps? Don't release it for Windows. That way they don't jump completely off ship. But just to give them the mobile users, like I've had to switch to Excel for my mobile sharing, and I had to install what's Microsoft's cloud, my OneDrive on my Macs. My Mac is iCloud, OneDrive, and Dropbox all syncing at the same time. It just seems like too many clouds. Okay, so let's add a slide here. And just in case you haven't seen this before, we're going to be introducing something called a design pattern. And design patterns are a proposed good solution to a common problem. All right, which is really a super generic type term, because we all have, I mean, the example I usually use at the beginning is, how many of you in here have ever made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Most of us at some point, right? So one person might think they have the right technique for making a peanut butter jelly, like put the peanut butter on first and then whatever it is, whether you put the jelly on top of the peanut butter, you put those in the two separate pieces of bread and whatever it is. You might have 3 or 4 different approaches to making a peanut butter and jelly. And each one of us thinks that that's the best solution. That's a good solution to that problem. But really, they're all going to ultimately get peanut butter and jelly on 2 pieces of bread and then slap them together. Some of you might want to toast it. Some of you don't want it toasted. Whatever it is. So all of them all of our solutions would be viable design patterns, even though they're solving the same problem. So what is good is all relative, and also what is a common problem. So, I picked a problem that most of us probably would have bumped into at some point, making a peanut butter and jelly, or replace it with some other sandwich, whatever it is. But that's a common problem across, maybe westernized civilizations or something like that. Well, what's a common problem to somebody who works at Lockheed Martin or something? Is it like missile tracking or whatever? The common problems can be almost anything as well. So design patterns are really made for academics. In fact, I'm sure an academic came up with the phrase design pattern so we can write papers and get them published. And it's like a quickie. We just say, stupid name. Here's the problem I'm solving. Here's a proposed good solution. Throw it out there, get your publication. If somebody wants to knock it down, that's fine. We've advanced the research. That's a crappy way of making a peanut butter and jelly. Okay, Mr. Gonzalez stands on the other side of the room and he lobs chunks of peanut butter at the bread because he thinks it's fun. Is what it is, and it's just not a efficient way of making peanut butter and jelly. That was so one time I was making a smoothie at home and my wife asked me if Mr. Gonzalez had helped because she said I was using this frozen fruit and it looked like I dropped a whole bunch of pieces I didn't notice. So to her, it looked like I was standing in the room like shooting baskets towards the blender. So you think I joke about Mr. Gonzalez in class. At home, it's worse. Yeah, we really should probably have, I don't know, a counselor or somebody do like a sit-in or something like that. Just give us kind of some homework to work on. All right, so over time, there's a whole bunch of famous design patterns that have kind of risen to the top. One of them is MVC. And we see MVC in, how many of you have heard of MVC? I think I probably mentioned it the first week in this class, did I? I mentioned it in here? So a famous one is MVC. This is the model view controller. And this guy says it's a good idea to separate your design from your logic. It also kind of says from your data, but let's just leave it at that for us right now. So keep your design in one place, your logic at another place. Design, logic, Unity has MVC. Okay, a design pattern is not an implementation. It's an idea. So a design pattern will tell you an approach to making a peanut butter and jelly. You still then have to go and execute that approach the way you're going to do it. You know, whether you open up the jar of peanut butter first, then the thing of jelly or whatever, you know, which do you do first? So you still get to go your own route with that implementation. So that's ModelViewController. We see it in basically all of our modern IDEs for, you know, whether it's Unity, Android Studio, Xcode, pick your poison. All right, but the one we're going to look at in here, and we look at it in some other classes as well, is this thing called the Singleton design pattern. Singleton design pattern says it's a good idea to store information that needs to be accessible by, let's say, more than one place. You could replace one with two or three, you know, whatever you decide is okay. More than one place in a single place. All right. So the idea would be, the example I usually use is we're all sharing a car. We pick this drawer over here, and that's where we keep the car keys. Okay, so that way we don't have to go hunt down each other. We go and find the car keys. But the true Singleton design pattern would say that when you grab the car keys, you get a copy of them. And there's still car keys there, but you go outside and you find there's no car. Okay. Because somebody else has an older copy of the car keys and they've driven off. But in any case, if I have a whole bunch of different things that need to share the same piece of information, rather than spending this time kind of sharing it with you and then sharing it with you and then sharing with you, kind of passing notes around, we'll go ahead and put that instruction manual in one place so that when you need a piece of information, you can go to that one place, look it up, and come back. Make sense? So that's the Singleton design pattern. Again, it's just an idea. All right, so the way we implement that in our modern languages, and I actually don't typically like the implementation that's built into a lot of IDEs. I don't think, well, actually, we probably do have one built into Visual Studio, but they take an approach where, so for core, they would do something like this. They would still have well, I'll just say it. They'll still have the constructor for core, so they'll actually have core create an instance of itself. And then you would ask core for its instance, and then use that instance to get instance fields and instance functions. Because there's actually a performance benefit to that. If you rely on the instance being created by the virtual machine in Java or .NET Component Architecture in C#, you're making it do a couple of extra steps to load that instance into its base memory. It doesn't matter. Okay, let's call them equivalent speed at the end of the day. I mean, we're splitting hairs there, and it's more difficult to write a singleton that has, you know, where you have to, and more difficult to use when you have to say core dot get instance. So now you have the instance of core dot give me the value I'm looking for. That's extra steps instead of just saying core dot the value I'm looking for. So that's the way I do it. So I'm just going to fill this guy up with static variables. So right now, let's just share a piece of information across our two fields, our two scenes rather. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to say static, because we want this variable to exist one time only. We want it to be owned by the class called core. And we're going to make this guy a Boolean. And actually, let's not make it a Boolean. Let's go ahead and let the other, oh, wait a minute. I said I was going to show you the bad way first, right? So we'll make it a Boolean. And we're going to say should show scene 1. All right, and I'm going to default that guy to true. So up in core, we're going to be remembering whether or not we should be showing scene 1. And again, this guy is not a mono behavior, so we're not going to be able to attach him to a game object. He will just exist in the project when the project's running. Okay, so let's see this in use now. So we're going to go in here, and in ModelViewController, where we have access to our scene container, and actually, if we want, should show scene 1 scene container. We just want to be really, really explicit as to what that variable is for, because as the Singleton starts filling up with variables, things might get a little bit out of hand. All right, so now we'll say inside of the ModelViewController, inside of, we'll just do the really inefficient version of this. So we're going to put this inside of, we already have our fixed update function, so we'll do mostly inefficient version. So right at the beginning of fixed update, we're going to ask the question, if core dot, what do I have? Oh, hold on. One last thing we need to do. These need to be in the same. No, that should have made it available. Let's close this guy, relaunch it. So the project relaunches. So if core dot, one last thing I need to do, I need to make this guy public. It needs to be public static bool in order to be accessible in other classes. Typically that wouldn't be the case, but the way that Unity creates its namespace, mono behaviors go in its own namespace, so these guys, there's not crossover. So now I should be able to say core dot should show scene 1 scene container. If that guy is true, then we will say this dot scene container dot set active to true. Every single time, every single time we do this, that happens. Okay. So now, actually, another thing I guess we could do if we want to make it even, this would actually probably be a little bit more efficient. We could just, instead of asking the question, we could just say this dot scene container dot set active to core dot should show scene 1 scene container. So then we're not asking the question, we're just doing. Whatever that variable is, we're going to set our active to that. So that would be actually a little bit more efficient, but we're setting this scene container to active often, right? Probably not the best thing. Now the hope is inside of this guy, it doesn't the state doesn't actually change. It just says, oh, it's already active, so I'm not going to do anything. Something like that. But that, again, that's more questions that are then being asked. Now, when we go to show our next scene, we set this guy to active, but we're also, in fact, we can actually let it become inactive naturally. So instead of setting it active to false here, we can go ahead and say core dot should show scene 1 container is equal to false. And then on the very next 60th of a frame, it's going to go ahead and turn that guy off, because that's what fixed update says to do for this particular scene. Then we're going to load the next scene. And then inside of Nora Fight, when we unload our scene, we're going to go ahead and we're going to say core dot should show scene 1 container is equal to true. And that should flip the switch back on, because the NORA controller is constantly checking that variable. Make sense? So we run this. Go ahead and drive around. So we've turned it off. We didn't really notice a performance problem. I'm going to hit the space bar now. Row. Why did you not come back? It says no cameras are rendering. So this scene is not getting unloaded. If I remember correctly, when we tried to do unload scene normally, it told us that was antiquated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Should show scene 1, scene container. Oh, hold on. I don't think we're resetting our steps. So it's still triggering it right away again when we come back into NORA controller. We do this when steps is equal to 0. We go ahead and hide this, but we need to go ahead and reset our steps so that, because this time, the very next time through, we're saying set it active, immediately set it not active, and we're not seeing the 60th of a frame difference, which actually is evidence that we don't see 60 frames a second. We see something like 40 some frames a second. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll generate a new number of steps. The better programming version of this would be to say private void generate steps, throw that code in there. And then from here, we'd say this dot generate steps. And then we would call the same function down at the bottom, just in case we change the way we want to generate steps, have a different cadence. We would change it in one place, and then any place that used it would access that. So we'll go ahead and generate new steps here. Then we can set our thing to false, and then go ahead and load the scene. And now it should flip back because our steps would presumably be something larger than 0 the next time through. Okay, so we're back here. Hit the space bar. Really? Oh. Okay. Anybody know what the issue is here? This told us one more piece of information. Anybody want to take an educated guess on the issue? No, camera's still there. Well, the camera is deleted from the scene temporarily because it is a child of our scene stuff. But that's not the problem, because the idea would be if scene stuff came back, the camera would come back with it, right? So scene stuff is not coming back. The question is why is scene stuff not coming back?
Let's try to come back with the other one.
Who brings it back?
The controller, which game stuff that's disabled.
Well, it's on the NORA, which is inside of game stuff, which is disabled. So when we removed scene stuff from our scene, disabled it, all of its child objects became disabled along with it, including NORA's controller. NORA's controller is not hitting fixed update again. It's never hitting because that script is turned off, right? Right, so this is actually good. This didn't allow us to do the bad solution to this. We understand how the bad solution would have worked, though, had the script kept pumping. I mean, I suppose we could have attached the script to a game object that we did not hide. You know, like a script container or something like that. Just like let that dude keep cooking. And then when time was ready, turn the thing back on. Yeah, it's almost like I guess a God script or something like that. That was just in control of all the individual pieces. But I don't know. It's a bad solution regardless. Okay, so what we're going to do instead is we'll come in here to core, and instead of holding this Boolean, we're going to go ahead and hold the game object itself. So this is going to be the game object that is our scene1 container. Okay, so he's going to hold on to that game object. Oh, this is going to be actually interesting in and of itself, whether or not we can turn that back. I think we're going to be able to. All right, so now in ModelViewController, we'll go ahead and get rid of this line for right now. We have access to that scene container publicly here. So in start, I'm going to go ahead and say core dot scene1 container is equal to this dot scene container. So we've let our Singleton know about this scene container, the actual game object. So we have multiple ways now of talking to that game object. We have this dot scene container points to that game object. And then we also have core dot scene1 container, which points to the same game object. Now this guy starts off as active, so we're not going to turn it off there. But when we should go to the next scene, now I'm going to generate my steps first, because we are going to need to generate new steps. We weren't doing that before anyways, and that is something that we need to do. I'm going to generate my steps first because that guy updates a variable in this script, and I don't want to disable this script until I've generated my steps. Then I'm going to say, well, I can say it a couple different ways. I can either say core dot scene1 container dot set enabled to false, or I can say this dot scene container dot set active is false. All right, so that should turn off this scene. Then we'll load the next scene. When we're ready to leave this next scene, we'll go ahead and turn it back on. Core dot scene1 container set active to true. So we're going to directly turn it on and off rather than rely on some update method to check that variable. All right, so now the hope is that when we set it to it's active to false here, it's still accessible. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to be able to set active. That variable needs to be accessible. So hopefully that restarts things. So we're in our second scene now. Then we come back. And Nora is off to the races. Second scene, come back. Now I am seeing a moment there where the scene is actually gone for a second. So let's see, which side is it happening on? When I switch from here, okay, so when I switch from let's go ahead and load the next scene first. and then generate our steps and set the scene to active. That should keep us from seeing that flash of no camera. I don't think it happened that time, but I didn't actually notice. Oh, I did notice. Okay, so let's do it this way then. We'll generate our steps. And then what we'll do actually is inside of Nora fight on start, we'll say core dot scene one container dot set active to false. So we'll go ahead and turn it off inside of the script for Nora fight, which means that that second scene has already been additively added, has already been loaded into our scene additively. And that's when we'll try to turn it off. And so for a moment there, both cameras should exist, and then we're disabling one of them. Yeah, that solved the problem. Okay. All right, so now we're in the second scene, and we should be responding to events here. So now what we need to do is we need to have the ability of selecting things inside of a menu. So if we go back to our, I don't think I have it open on here. Let's do Final Fantasy NES fight, something like that. Yeah. Well, this is the final boss, so it should last for a little bit. So we'll see kind of the cadence of a fight. All right, so we're going to be creating something that looks like this. Right now we have our single Nora up here. So notice that he's selecting, you know, a bunch of stuff here. Now, our menu is not going to be that complex, even though that doesn't look all that complex. But we really want to maybe do like a punch or a magic or something like that. All right. And then notice that when the guy comes forward, there are some animations that they do. And then the scene flashes when it's magic or something. But you know, when we're looking at this now, we know how it pulled this off, right? We can kind of think through how you might do something like that. But we really need this menu type system. So let's look on what it's going to take to have that work with arrows. So we'll just do we'll do melee or magic, I guess. So Nora either just does punching or well, actually Nora would probably do ninja-ing. So we'll do ninja with, well, for instead of magic, like maybe tase. Nora would tase people. All right, makes sense. Perfect. All right. So Nora is just a little bit rural Nebraska. Never do that in rural Nebraska. They probably do that in rural Nebraska. Okay. So go back into our scene here, and we're going to be working with our fight scene for a little bit. We'll go ahead and save stuff here. All right, so we need to give ourselves a menu. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to UI, and we're going to create, let's see, let's mess with some of these things. So I'm going to create a UI panel. And where did that put that in the scene? Will they let us use canvases in the scene? So the whole thing, the whole screen now has this panel on it, which is okay. Let me now try to add to my canvas some text. So there's my new text. And we're going to have this guy say Ninja. Now can I move this guy around? I should be able to move it around out here. Aren't you going to let me drag it? All right, so what a canvas does is it gives you something to draw on in the background. So it effectively follows your camera at all times. All right, and so I have a panel in here. I'm not sure really what we're going to use this this panel for, actually. So for right now, let's just take out the panel. And here's our text. I want to be able to move that guy around, but it doesn't look like it's going to give me the arrows on it. So we need to, so I'm going to move the text. So when I click on the position of the text, I'm going to leave it at 0, 0 initially. So when I, software updated, perfect. Okay. So over here for this, the rect transform for this, this text, if we click on this box here, this allows us to kind of choose where we want to put this guy. So I'm going to, we choose bottom. So here's bottom. I want it bottom centered. I'm going to move it. It does not move it. It doesn't look like I can click on it. So the only way I can move it is by changing its position on X. So position on Y is 319 currently. So if we move that to like 500, actually no, like 100, that's going to put it near the bottom of the screen. Doesn't that seem like something you should be able to drag? Seems like something you should be able to drag. Oh, probably is something we can drag. There we go. I was just still on the game screen. We'll zoom out here. So here's my canvas. So if you click on the canvas, that'll zero in on that. I was still in game. That's why you didn't see it dragging. Click on scene, moves you back in here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And I'll kind of keep this guy centered. And I'm going to click on the text itself. And we're going to go ahead and move that text over, maybe down here. We'll say that's good. Then we're going to create a second text. So I'll just copy this first one, paste it. So we'll call this first text Ninja text. And we'll call this second one, how do you spell Taze? T-A-Z-E. Call the second one Taze text, and we'll drag that guy down a little bit so it's beneath that one. And we'll change the text on that to Taze. And then let's make the font for these guys a little bit bigger. So we'll highlight both of those. We'll set font size to maybe 24. And then I have to move one of the texts a little bit up because they squeezed into each other there. All right, so one's at position, let's do 115. And then the other one is at position 75. So we have kind of an even-ish type distance between them. So that's 40 pixels apart, right? All right, so those are our two things we're going to choose from on the screen. Now, what we want to have happen is we need to have a arrow thing maybe that switches back and forth between those two guys. So that arrow thing is going to be relative to where that is on the screen. Let's see what else we have inside of UI for selecting stuff. We have a toggle. Okay, toggle's just on or off. Delete that. Let's go back to UI. We have a drop down. We have a button. I mean, a button would be okay if we were using a mouse-based interface, because then we could click it. But if we're using, if we think about how Nintendo worked, where we hit up or down, so we needed to have something that went and moved between those. Guess we could use a slider. But I think we're going to need to fake it. That's going to be okay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create another text then. Actually, let's create an image. I think that'll look better. So in UI, I'm going to create an image. So that's going to be my image. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll drag my image into position here. And I need to give it a source image, and I'm going to make this guy a sprite. So we need to go and find an arrow. Okay, and if we keep our scene looking similar to theirs where the background was dark, we can probably go with a white arrow. If we want to mimic it pretty good. So underneath here, we'll go to, is it under tools? Color, white. All right, so here's our white arrow. Make it look pretty, just a hand-drawn thing. It might actually not look bad. Actually, I like that one. Let's go with our hand-drawn white arrow. Oh, that's actually see-through. That's not going to work. So here, let's go with this one. Is this one see-through? No, this one's good. Probably wanted the rest of it, though, to be still not good. Still not good. We want something that has the background is clear, but the arrow is white. Or is this kind of a? That one actually looks kind of cool. Just it's all. I think we go with that one. That just looks cool. So we'll have to make our background such that that shows up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save the image. And we'll put this on our desktop. And we'll call it select arrow. And then we'll go back into our Unity. And I'm going to create a folder in here. we'll call this images, because this didn't come from a sprite sheet. This came from a single image. And I'll right click and I'm going to import a new asset. We're going to go to our desktop and here's our select arrow. So we have that arrow now inside of our project. All right, then I'll click on my image. Make sure I'm in my image folder. I'm going to go ahead and drag the image into the source for our image. So now we see our little arrow thing pop up here. All right, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to rename the thing on our canvas to like select arrow or something like that. Okay, so now we need to size this guy so he looks correct. So I'm going to click on this this little square up here. So instead of the thing that moves it around or rotates it, it's the scale, the selected object. So I'm going to scale it down some. Whoop. That would have flipped it over. And then I'll shorten it some. We'll say that's good enough. And we're going to initially point this guy at our ninja. Okay, so it's initially pointed at ninja, and that's at position Y on -195. If I move it down a little bit, it should go smaller. Okay, yep. So -195 was pointing at our ninja. And if I add, or if I subtract 40 from that, that should be at our tase. So that's our offset, is 40 pixels. Okay. So we need to have programmatic access to that arrow for moving between our two selections. All right, and let's just run this scene real quick. So we see we have our canvas here. So the canvas always takes up the screen. So we're kind of painting behind our person. So now we want to have the up and down arrows control that that ninja arrow. Okay. Now we also probably want to have the ability to turn those guys on or off. So if I come inside the canvas here and I say create empty, and we're going to go ahead and create our fight. Well, we'll call it fight select box. And then we move those three things inside that guy. Now we should be able to turn that text on and off. So similar to what we did with our scene before. Okay, because only when it's our turn, because Final Fantasy is an offset. So it's called turn-based. It's a turn-based game where when we first come into the scene, we probably, since this is based on Dungeons and Dragons, we do something called roll for initiative. Anybody a D&D player in here? Do you know what roll for initiative means? All right, so roll for initiative is we come in, we roll the dice, and I guess typically it's the lowest value is who goes first, but whatever. It's whoever wins that roll gets to go first. All right, so you'll get your first choice. Some monsters in Final Fantasy naturally have initiative modifiers to make that they're like fast movers. So same thing works like that in Dungeons and Dragons. If you have a high dexterity, you move faster, so you have a modifier. So if you roll a 12 and you have a modifier of 6, let's say we're going for smallest number, you would take your 12 minus your 6, and now it's actually as if you rolled a 6 compared to everybody else. So you might get to go first. But we'll maybe randomly choose who gets to go first, and we'll just have it on an even playing field initially. So we kind of start creating our monsters for this. Or actually, initially, we can just assume that Nora gets to go first. Nora gets first strike. Maybe that'll be the easiest for us. Okay. So only when it's Nora's turn is this going to be an active select box for us to choose a thing. Okay. So we want to have the arrows move that arrow up or down on that. So in order to do that, we're going to need to have access to our select arrow. And we're going to have to keep track of which position this guy's in. And we might want to do that inside of a script, maybe associated with Nora in this case. So we might have a fight script. We already have the fight script, right? And that is attached to Nora. So we can have this fight script be the controller here. So when we first come in, we'll have our, so we need to have access to the final select box in there. So we can turn that whole thing on or off. And then we also need to have direct access to our select arrow for which position it's going to be in. So let's go into our script here. We'll say public game object. And what did I name it out here? I named it fight select box. And then we're also going to have public game object selection arrow. I actually call it select arrow out there, so let's just match it. So give ourselves those two game objects. Go back into Unity. Click on Nora here so we have access to her script. We should get a couple of new things here in the script. So we need our fight select box. Drag that in there. And then we need our select arrow so we can move that dude. Put that in there. All right. And then how would you say is we already know how to get the input, right? For, our arrows, up or down arrow. What is the best way, or what's a reasonable way? What's a design pattern for moving that arrow up and down? How would you accomplish this? We know it's 40 pixels difference. So from the top position to the bottom position is this guy's Y is at a certain value, and this Y is at that value minus 40. So how would you be able to toggle back and forth between those two? What's the position of this guy? What's the transform of the arrow? So this is the arrow. Use your imagination, right? So this is the arrow. How do I get what kind of animal is the position of this guy? Go ahead.
It's the transform of my XY.
Okay, and in 2D space, it's so the transform has a position, and that position is what kind of animal? It's just an X and Y, right? And how do we store X and Y's in Unity?
Well, they're called in a vector.
Vector 2, right? So X, Y, and Z would be a vector 3. X and Y would be a vector 2. We can actually use them interchangeably, but in 2D space, we would probably use a vector 2. Okay, so let's say I wanted to get the initial position of this guy. I know he's initially in option 0, right? So I might create private. Maybe we call this int selected index. Maybe that starts off at 0. And then I'm going to say private vector 2 arrow position. And then inside of start, we'll go ahead and say this dot arrow position is equal to, what should I set that guy equal to? I want it to be the initial position of my arrow. Do I have access to my arrow in here? Yeah, it's inside this game object called select arrow. So I say this dot select arrow dot transform dot position. So now I have the initial position of that guy. So now, instead of calling this guy arrow position, I'm going to say arrow position index 0. And then I want to have a second arrow position. Oh, wrong button. And we'll call this guy index 1. And we'll say this dot arrow position index 1 is going to be equal to what?
New vector 2 where the y is.
New vector 2. So x is going to be the same as the old x. So x will be this dot arrow position index 0 dot x, and y will be this dot arrow position index 0 dot y minus 40f. And now I don't remember for sure. I don't remember if vectors are passed by address. What would it mean if this vector here, so select arrow dot transform dot position, if that guy was passed by address, what would that mean for us here? When I moved into position index 1, when I moved down to that position, that other guy would actually change as well. It would follow him. So we can test that. Actually, we can't conveniently test that right now. Well, I'll leave that to you for your homework to test it. The alternative would be what? If this guy happens to be passed by address, what would the fix be?
New vector.
Yeah, do the same thing we did here. But the new vector would be arrow position index 0 dot x and arrow position dot index 0 dot y. Actually, it would be the selected arrow, this dot selected arrow dot transform dot position dot x and this dot select arrow dot transform dot position dot y. But you would create a new vector 2, which would give you a brand new memory address, so then you wouldn't have to worry about the position of the original guy. But try it like this first, because this keeps us from having to create one extra variable, right? And if this doesn't work, then create a new vector 2 for this guy so that you're dealing with separate memory for those two guys. So what we want to do for our homework is inside update, make up and down arrows, move the select arrow between the two indexes. Make sense? And change selected index variable appropriately. So when we're at index 0, it'll be 0. When we hit down, it goes to 1, change it to 1. When we go back up to 0, change it to 0, so on and so forth. So that guy toggles back and forth. Make sense? All right, I will see everybody on, what's today? Today's Thursday? I'll see everybody on Tuesday. And I'll go ahead, I'll try to share this guy again, but Muath was saying, I mean, do you have access to this project? It should be up on Slack.
I don't think you've given us.
Okay, I'll put the link up there, but just in case, I'm going to give you this code as our starting point. I mean, I kind of want you to maybe create your own anyways, but for a reference, go ahead and